Hi, and welcome to Mind That Childminder, a podcast that's meant for well us childminders. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that we usually don't like talking about very much, but it's time we talked about it because it's all over the news right now. So, we're going to be talking about potty training. And whether you call it potty training, potty learning, toilet training, any of these words, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the wee, we're talking about the poo, we're talking about the body parts. So let's go. And if you normally have dinner or something while you're listening to this podcast, I think maybe press pause for today and come back to it when you're not around food, because let's face it, it's not something we want to chat about while we're eating. So do what you got to do, come back and talk about the poo. I've chosen to theme this episode around toilet training at a time when it seems to be all over the media about toilet training. For those who are from the future, we're currently in September 2024. A charitable foundation called Kindred Squared made a survey, or held a survey, where they spoke to teachers and parents of children, and they asked about different aspects of school readiness. The findings of the report said that 90% of teachers in 2023 had at least one child in their class who was not toilet trained. These findings have sparked a huge debate as to why this has happened and why there seems to be a loss of skills of children reaching school age and what can be done about it. The survey results have reached the media, and it seems that many organisations and charities are focusing on toilet training as something that needs to be supported immediately. There are links to the survey if you want to have more of a look about it in the show notes. So if you want to find out more, please do so. Okay, so we all know that potty training happens. Why have you chosen to theme this episode around it? Well, I kind of want to talk about a bit of what a childminder's role in toilet training is, what you should know about potty training. I want to talk about any research. I want to talk about how you know what's healthy and not healthy, how you have conversations with families. I'm going to talk about challenges you might face and the benefits of being a childminder with potty training, and maybe share some tips too, and think about how potty training might look in different cultures and countries. So we've got loads to talk about, considering it's a subject we don't really talk very much about. So I hope you feel like you're ready to discuss it, because it's a hot topic right now and we're going to delve straight in. Now we're going to talk about what is a childminder's role in toilet training. Well, that answer is going to differ from person to person. Some people will think that potty training is entirely the parent's responsibility and the childminder will have no role in really kind of starting it or dealing with it, and that the parents need to take time off and deal with it at home. Some people think that their role is to help parents know the sign of readiness and to support them and signpost them to more information, maybe more like some kind of parenting tips. Some people think they should take an equal role to families, especially if the child is with them full time, going through the whole process with the family, so it's the same in the setting and the home. It's worth taking time for you to think about what your role and involvement should be for you, because this is going to affect your expectations and how you support families and what offer you're willing to give. It will also affect the discussions that you have with the families around potty training, as their expectation about your role might be different. So if you're upfront early about how you carry it out in your setting, then there's less chance of an uncomfortable situation or conversation later on. So really, your role as a childminder in toilet training is up to you. There are things you've got to know about potty training. Even if you have more of a hands-off approach where you expect parents to take time off and deal with the potty training themselves, you need to know some things that are going to support the child as they continue their potty training journey, because it's not just going to be perfected over one weekend and never have another accident again, etc. So something you do need to know is you need to know what happens and the parts of the body that are used in weeing and pooing. It's encouraged that the early years practitioners are using anatomically correct names for body parts, and that we're teaching children these, and that's partly to do with child protection. It's believed that if children know the anatomically correct words for their body, they're more kind of empowered, as well as knowing which ones are private And if something does happen to them, unfortunately, and it does happen as well, we all know that they're able to describe exactly what happened in a more kind of factual way, and in a way that is not confusing for the kind of adults taking evidence. So it's really important that we're using body part names properly and not just using made up words. It's very difficult for many of us because in this culture we have a really romantic view of children, that they're innocent and they should be kind of like protected and their childhood retained. And so quite often we use kind of these made up names to kind of soften it and to it, but actually that's more for us. It doesn't really teach the child anything. They're using these made up words for names. You might have heard things like foo-foo. That's more to make the adults feel better about the child being innocent. It's not actually doing very much for the child. So we need to make sure that we know all the body parts. And if you don't know them, it's totally fine. There are so many pieces of information out there. I'm going to talk about some of the body parts used. Don't be ashamed if you don't know. It is a subject that has been shamed, especially for women. There are different parts that we've been told to be ashamed of for many, many years culturally. So it's okay if you don't know them, but really, if you don't know them, take the time to educate yourself about them and to feel comfortable about using the words, because it's important in order to protect the children and to stop this recurrent shame through generations about our bodies, because we've all got a body, we've all got these bits and bobs. So we need to be able to talk about it, because giving that confidence means that we're going to be able to speak to doctors about it if something's not quite right. We don't have to feel ashamed. The symptoms of terrible things don't have to be missed because we're ashamed of talking about different body parts. So I went down a slightly different route to what I was expecting there, but I'm trying to tell you it's important to know. So we're going to talk about some body parts, and it's time to put your brave pants on so that we can talk about it and feel confident about it. So what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be talking about bladders feeling full. We're going to be talking about urine or wee being in the potty. We're going to be talking about wiping an anus after stool, and it's all language that we need to get comfortable with. Knowing the correct body parts, and the kind of the differences, such as a rectum is not the same as an anus. We need to make sure we know what those correct words are. So if you aren't sure on the process of how kind of the body turns waste into wee and poo, or urine and stools, then it's time that you maybe think about trying to take little steps into learning how that happens, so that we can educate the children in a factually correct way without any shame. Okay, so we don't become childminders and then wake up the next day suddenly knowing what healthy bowel habits are for children, or the ins and outs of what is normal or expected. So let's not be shy and let's try and find out some information about this. I went to a website called eric.org.uk, and they have detailed advice about what poo should be like for children aged 0 to 5. It can be really tricky to know because so many things affect what is normal, including the age, the weaning stage, if the child is breastfed. But as a general roundup of what normal and healthy bowel movements are, I'm going to list them in a few different stages. Newborn babies have that really famous greeny black stool within 48 hours called meconium. This changes to a mustardy yellow colour and it gets firmer as they begin to eat solid foods. So we've all looked after babies before probably, and we know that their poop is, more runny because they're on milk. Breastfeeding can make stools more watery. So if you have a child who is being breastfed as a baby, their stool will be more watery. If you have a child who's being breastfed and they're a toddler, their poop is going to be more watery. So it's more about learning what is normal for the child. If poop looks like little nuggets, then that's usually a sign of constipation. So if it's continued, then it's best to get the families to chat to their health visitor. If it's kind of like they have, regular firm poos that come out all in one go, and then one of the days they have a nuggety kind of poo, then that's kind of fine. But if it's continued, if every day there's just a little bit, then they do need to go and speak to the health visitor or their GP about it. How many times should a child be pooping? Well, it depends on their age and their feeding stage. So you definitely should read up on it. But a newborn baby, roughly 2 to 3 poops a day. Again, it might be slightly more, a slightly different consistency if they're breastfed. A 1-year-old is 1 to 3 times a day, and 3 years upwards once a day. As we get towards more adults kind of stage, it could be once a day, or it could be up to every 3 days. So it's important you know what a healthy poop looks like. So your homework for this week is to go and look up a poo chart. I don't normally give homework, and I don't normally look at poo charts, but we've got to give it a go. Go and look at a poo chart and see which poo is the one that should be normal. And I definitely give you all the best ideas of things to do in your spare time. Right, we're feeling a bit more prepared. We know the anatomic body parts. We know what a healthy poop is looking like. Well, if you're doing your homework, we know how frequently they're supposed to happen for different age groups. And, we're getting a bit more comfortable knowing that we're going to be having these conversations. So let's think about having a conversation with the families about potty training. It can be a little bit awkward at first if you're a bit shy about talking about these things, or you don't quite know how to approach it, or you're new to childminding and you've never really had to deal with talking about someone else's child's poop before. It comes with practice, and also we just need to get over it. We don't need to be ashamed. Everybody poos. We just have to get over it and make it a non-generational kind of succession of shame. We need to teach children that it's fine to talk about so that they can seek medical advice when they're older. So start early with your policy, your expectations of what your role is going to be from the get-go. Having a policy in place because you've thought about what your role is going to be in potty training in your setting means that expectation is set from the beginning, and that you don't need to have a difficult conversation when you find that a parent's expectations are different to yours. Have information and websites available for parents before the child seems ready for potty training, because how do parents know that their child is ready? What seems obvious to us after many years of childminding, or in working in early years, or having our own children, may be completely unknown to someone who's a first-time parent. So having that kind of information available, flyers, leaflets, getting it to them before their child is showing any signs is going to be really helpful, because it's going to empower them to know what to look for and what to expect. And also parents get a bit nervous about what's normal, what age should they be, all of these kind of things. So having that information available before they get worried about it is probably a good thing. Make it an easygoing, non-awkward conversation to have, hopefully like you're having today. Being easygoing, talking about their child's nappies from the beginning, mentioning when something doesn't seem normal for them instead of being embarrassed about it. So, if you're doing it from the beginning and the child has nuggety poo, tell them. You say, they've had some nuggety poo today, maybe they're feeling a bit constipated, we need to try and make sure they're having more fibre or more water, whatever, keep an eye on it. If you have these conversations early, it's not going to come as a complete surprise when the child is potty training and we need to talk about all sorts of other kind of bowel habits and things. So definitely try and get used to chatting about it before potty training. And it also gives them time to not feel awkward about talking to their childminder about their child's poop. You can also talk about healthy eating ideas. I know, poo, healthy eating. So that children have healthy bowel movements before potty training, so that we're avoiding the situation of them having constipation or having diarrhea regularly because of poor diet. So, you can have all sorts of things in place about healthy eating, having a healthy eating policy. If you provide food, making sure that it's in keeping with being healthy and having enough fibre, etc. And there's lots of research on that, and actually it's another subject we should probably discuss in future, is nutrition of children, so keep your eyes peeled for the future. But children having healthy bowel movements, drinking enough water so that they're kind of going at a regular time before potty training, like all of these things will help. Explain to families about the skills that are needed before potty training and how they're all important. So you don't want to have a child who's potty training who can't manage the other tasks because they're not ready. So being able to sit up independently in this culture is quite important. Being able to pull down and up their clothes independently, making sure the clothes are suitable, that they haven't got lots of fiddly buttons and fittings on, that they're kind of, Velcro or elastic. All of those things are very important, and kind of, the other kind of gross motor skills of being able to squat, being able to stand up, all of these things are going to be important skills in getting ready for potty training. So telling the parents this before potty training means that the children can practice pulling up their trousers when they're finished a nappy change and all of these kinds of things. Try not, however, to make it stressful. Adding too much pressure on a family or shaming them is not going to help anyone. You can practice conversations if you need to, so you can approach the topic positively, but in a way that shows children and parents that for typically developing children, we expect them to be clean and dry for the majority of the time before they go into reception. And this is particularly important when you're thinking about children from other cultures, other backgrounds, because their school age is different to England and Wales and Scotland, etc., from the UK. So we really need to set that expectation that in typically developing children, we expect them to be clean and dry before they're 5, and these are the kind of steps that we can take to get you there. And we don't need to add pressure onto that because that can already feel quite intimidating to parents. If you're worried about boys, males, potty training, that can be quite a common thing because often males will stand up to go for a wee. So it's worth chatting to parents first, if you have a male child, that potty training is actually easier with sitting down first. If you're worried about the aim of the urine coming out of the penis, going all over your floor, going all over your stuff, then you should chat to the parents about it and ask them to refrain from teaching them to stand up until they're a bit older, when they've got the hand-eye coordination, when they've got kind of other gross motor skills, and when they are clean and dry for themselves throughout the day, so that you know that when they do learn to wee standing up, that they're going to be having the skills in place to do that successfully whilst not weeing all over your floor, which in some cases is a problem if you have certain kinds of tiles. The wee can go a bit under it and it's a bit gross. So if you're worried about that, and it's perfectly fine to be worried about that, you need to have that discussion with parents early before they teach their child to stand up and wee, because then you're setting the expectation early and you're not going to be confronted with a problem. Being a childminding setting means that we're usually working in our own home. So as I just mentioned about male children standing up to wee, and you might be worried about the wee going all over your house, this is something we need to think of as childminders. We have our own home, our own furniture, and we're worried about getting wee and poo on that. And this can be a particular challenge for childminders that is different to being in a group setting such as nurseries, because these are our things where our families sit on, and it's not just kind of, wipe clean stuff. What if we get poop all over our sofa? That's not fun for anyone. They're expensive. We don't get money necessarily to replace our sofa. We get wear and tear, kind of expenses on our tax return, but we don't get a brand new sofa because a child has pooped all over it. So, this is a challenge that childminders face with potty training. We also go out into the local community and we have to use public toilet spaces quite early on in potty training, and they might only have adult-sized toilets available, no steps for children, no small seat to put on the top. So it's something that we need to think about if a child is going to be starting potty training, how we're going to manage that. Because again, if you're working in a nursery or school, the toilets that are all child size, or you have potties that are, you know, numerous potties available. And it's quite different in a childminding setting when we have other things like school runs to do. Well, you can't just walk into a school with 3 children because one of your children need a potty unless you have a really good relationship with the school. So, you know, these are all legitimate challenges that we face. And we also might have multiple children learning at the same time. And how are we going to manage the resources and the attention on this? Are you going to have more than one potty available because you've got 2 2-year-olds learning? Or are you going to clean them out between use? How are you going to manage it if they both need to use the potty at the same time? How are you going to focus your attention on 2 children that are potty training because you need to see what's going on? So they are all challenges that we face, but there are ways of overcoming them. You can have travel potties that like fit quite nicely into a rucksack. You can bring a little seat to put over an adult-sized toilet. You can have things like towels and mats and various things like this. And also, you can have multiple children learning at the same time, and kind of bigger childminding settings where you work together with other adults. This is going to be more common. But you can try and plan your children sneakily, if possible, that you have an under one, a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, or an under one, a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. So they're at different stages of development. It's not always going to be the case, and you are going to have situations where children are not developing typically. So, you know, it's not always going to be the magic fix for that, but it's something you can think about especially if you're new to childminding, that you might not want to take on 3 1-year-olds who are all probably going to hit potty training at the same time and only have one potty available. So think about it beforehand with the mix of children that you have about how you might handle that situation if it happens. Well, it's not all bad news about being a childminder with potty training. Those are all kind of legitimate concerns, but we do have some benefits of being a childminder with potty training. We have children of different ages and stages, which meaning younger children are getting to be exposed to vocabulary and role modelling around potty training and toilet training from very early on. Possibly, childminders have a smaller ratio, and it means that they might get more individual attention, and it can be placed around potty training at the time. We're also generally a more personalised care setting. We're able to tailor things to each individual family in most cases, as long as they kind of align with our policies and things. So we might be able to kind of change our routine a little bit if we need to. If a child is finding potty training quite distressing outside, we might be able to, you know, have an easier week being at home, rather than having to carry out the same routine each day because we look after so many families. So we definitely have some things that are a bonus from being a childminding setting when we think about potty training or toilet training. Hopefully you're feeling a bit more empowered now to speak to families early, that you know your body parts and all of that jazz. So what I'm going to do is give you some tips on things that I do in my setting, and also some things I found while researching this episode. Things I often do in my setting. I make it usual from early age that a child sits on the potty after a nappy change, so they feel comfortable about sitting on it and it's normal and they know the language around it, and if a successful thing happens in there, a wee or poo, then we get a reward and an association. When a child is a little bit older, or they're trying potty training, but sometimes the poos and the pull-ups and the pants happen, I often end up tipping the poo into the toilet or potty, depending which, one they're using, to show them where the poo is expected to be. I don't shame them about it. I just say, oh, the poo wants to go in the toilet to see their friends, flush it away. It's okay if you have a child who's potty training to put things like towels down on your sofa to protect it, or get a sofa cover or anything like this. If you have a child that's a bit unreliable with wheeze, they're still learning, it's okay. The setting is our home usually, and it isn't fair to expect that our furniture gets covered in wee, especially if the child's in early stages. But don't make it a fuss and don't make it exclusionary. For example, the towel or the mat or the cover should be there all the time for every child, and not only put there if a child wants to sit on the sofa. If that particular child, wants to sit somewhere, you shouldn't be moving a towel around everywhere they sit, because it's a bit exclusionary. So we should think about how we're going to manage our furniture and our home in a way that it's the same for everyone, and it isn't super noticeable that we're kind of protecting our furniture from a child. We're trying to protect it from the urine or the stools, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't make a child feel ashamed. And don't be afraid to say to parents that they need to consult with you before they intend to potty train, so that you can make sure that your week is lined up to support the child. It is not a good time in a setting to be settling a new baby and a new toddler while the other one is potty training, because you've got too much going on. There's only one of you probably. So, you need to be working as a team with the family, that if a child is showing signs, that maybe they could try it over a particular weekend to get the bulk of the potty training done. And then if it's not mostly successful over that time, to wait and try again in a few weeks. We don't want to miss a child feeling ready and empowered to be potty training. We don't want to force them to be into nappies and things. We just want to make sure that we are able to support the child fully, and not to have the child go home on a Friday, being in nappies, never a conversation had about potty training. Then on Monday morning, a family arrives with one change of clothes, a pair of pants, off you go. That's I'm not going to say it never happens that a child is potty trained over a weekend and never has another accident ever, but you need to be able to say to parents that they need to talk about it with you first, because you need many changes of clothes. You need a week that you're going to be able to do it and tailor it around them. You need to know that it's going to happen. You need to know that that everything is arranged. You have a potty available and it's not in your loft because you haven't had a child of potty training age for a couple of years. Because if that potty is in your loft and the child comes on Monday and you're unprepared, well, how are you going to make them go? How are you going to help them? How are they going to be able to use potty? So don't be afraid to talk to parents early and say that they need to talk to you about it first, so you can come up with a plan together. If that is, you think it's your role that you'll be involved in that early stage of potty training, that is up to you. It's what's written in your policy and what you've already agreed. I'm not here to tell you what to do, just giving you some tips. Moving on to some more kind of, what's a word I'm looking for? Other people's tips, I suppose. Penny to Sony is a kind of a child development well-known name, and from a Pacey video, Pacey being a professional association for childcare in early years, they say, Penny to Sony says even that you should be matter of fact about potty training, and that can be helpful. So a bit similar to what we were talking about earlier, telling them when a wee or poo is happening so they can learn that feeling and the vocabulary and link them together before they've even potty trained can be really helpful. So if you get to know a sign that a child is grunting and they're shoving out a poop, then you can tell them, oh, you're pooing. You don't have to be like, ugh, you're pooing, because that will put shame on. Oh, you're pooing. That's what it feels like. That's the word we're going to use. Boom. Makes it much easier. And having independent information available for parents from around 18 months or earlier, as we've already discussed. For example, information that's reliable, such as the NHS website, so they're aware of the expectations and the signs that you might spot, and so that you're all following a similar model, so that you don't have completely different approaches to it and then that confuse the child. And we also should ask parents to provide clothes that are easy for this time. So asking for elastic waistbands, skirts or dresses, oversized t-shirts, no buttons, no poppers, no zippers, all of these things that a child can just, because when they gotta go, they gotta go. They don't necessarily get that warning early on. Gotta go, you gotta go. Woof, off we go. So those are all some useful tips, and I hope they help you if you haven't had very much experience, or you find it a bit challenging to handle some potty training that's going on. But feel free to ask any questions and we can do some research together or find out more information about your particular problem. If you go on the Facebook or the Instagram or X, we'll be able to kind of chat that through a little bit. We should also remember that children are still learning and they are not likely to get it right the first time, first week. first few months are going to be a little bit hit and miss, and we really, really need to try not to shame children if they have an accent or they soil themselves. We need to find ways to explain to them that what the expectation is in a way that doesn't make them feel bad. We don't want to find it ridiculously funny that they've weed on the floor, but equally we don't want to make them ashamed and cry and have that negative feeling. So there does come a bit of a point where you need to work out for yourself how to approach that. Some people like to use motivational rewards like stickers. I personally don't use those things because I find it challenging to take them away when a child is used to the toilet training. But it's a tried and tested technique for many. So finding ways to say, oh, you've done a wee on the floor, let's go and try on the potty while I change you, or while we clean that up. You know, we don't need to make it disgusting or a problem. It can be really difficult sometimes. They're having a really busy day and we think the child is kind of like getting the hang of it, and then they do a wee on the floor and we're in the middle of cooking lunch and we've got all these things going on. Why have you weed on the floor? It's really easy to slip into that, and sometimes we do have to be a little bit kind of, you know, oh, where did wees go on the potty? You know, we don't have to be completely, oh, that's fine to do a big wee on the floor and splash around in it. Like, that's not what we want. And it's not good for our homes or for the other children. So we need to find a balance in the kind of technique of handling accidents. And again, I'm sure there's lots of advice about that online from medical professionals and things. Be careful when you're doing online research to make sure they're from reputable sources. Don't just take any old person's word for it on TikTok video about what's normal and how to handle behaviour, because it might not be the best way as a professional to be dealing with behaviour. So it's really worth thinking about how you might handle your language and your reactions to kind of wheeze or soiling accidents. So it's definitely worth thinking about. It's your behaviour that you need to kind of think about in this case. We've chatted quite a lot about poos and wees and potties and all sorts of things. We kind of roughly know that when a child is showing signs of potty training, that for us in our culture, in this Western culture, we see that as things like being able to hold a wee for a long time. So maybe they have a nappy on and it's dry for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's wet all in one go, which you can really see clearly with cloth nappies. Disposable nappies wick moisture away quicker and it's harder to tell, but that's one sign. Another sign is being able to communicate when they're doing a wee or a poo. Another sign might be that they kind of go off to hide when they do something, so they know when they're doing it. There are other things like being interested in the potty or the toilet. You know, they want to sit on it, they want to do these things. There are many different signs that we could see, and usually when we start seeing the signs, that's when in a Western culture or society we choose to start potty training children, and those are usually seen around 18 months maybe, but it can be a bit older. So in the UK, in America, typically the age that we see potty training beginning is around 2.5 to 3 years old, and usually we wait waiting until a child is ready. In other cultures, it's not the same. So if you look after children in a area that is more diverse, it's definitely something to think about. The expectations, views of potty training, because even though the parent of the child, it may be the first time they've potty trained a child, and so they don't know which way is the best way or which way, you know, is the typical way in this culture. Not necessarily the best way. Different is not wrong. But their parents, the grandparents, if they're involved, are going to be kind of telling them the best way to do it. So it's important to make yourself aware, because the expectation might be different and you're going to have to navigate how you're going to deal with potty training if there is a difference in your expectations with yours and parents. So in Western societies, we have had easy and pretty cheap access to disposable nappy. And that means that potty training is getting later because of all sorts of reasons. Back in the 1940s, when everyone was hand washing cloth nappies, there was more of a drive to get children out of nappies because, we didn't want to be hanging up nappies for 3-4 years. We didn't want to be washing and scrubbing them for 3 or 4 years per child. We didn't want the smell hanging around for a while. So, now we've got disposable nappies and we just kind of like, a child poos in it, throw it away. It's the world's problem because it's ending up in landfill. Boom, gone, out of sight, out of mind. It means that children can be in those nappies because they go in bigger and bigger and bigger sizes, and we don't really, think about it until much later. So there's definitely a societal impact on how potty training is carried out. There may also have been a change because women started to go to work and grandparents are working longer, and also, it was quite typical probably when I was a child in the 90s that kind of grandma wasn't really working, or she was working part-time, and she would look after the child or children while mum went out to work. It was more of a thing. But now grandparents are working up to kind of retirement age, and parents are having children younger, or there's all sorts of reasons that could mean that there isn't anyone there at home to be potty training and giving the attention to that at home. So there's less focus on the skill, and then it gets left till later. It could also be that kind of parents expect the childcare because they're leaving their child full time in somebody else's care. It could be that they're thinking, well, childcare will tell me when my child is ready. That expectation is not there. There was also an argument that during COVID, which is where this kind of survey that I mentioned earlier was, the children from 2023 and this year are going to be children who were babies in kind of COVID lockdowns. It could be part of the reason that children are kind of seen to be losing skills because parents weren't accessing play groups, toddler groups, social circles, family groups with their babies and toddlers at a really crucial point. So therefore weren't getting the kind of almost peer pressure or the expectations set by other people. They weren't getting to see their house visitors as much. Some children were completely missed off. They didn't get any visit at all. They just had kind of paperwork tick check. And so the expectation of the readiness just didn't exist. Parents weren't having conversations about, little Tommy is using the potty, and we've had a really, and that Sahid is dry at night, and all of these kind of conversations where parents might go, oh, it seems like my child is their age and they're not using the potty yet, or maybe I should start thinking about it. These kinds of conversations just didn't happen in 2020 and into 2021. And then those toddlers would have been past the age where they went to toddler group and maybe just went straight into kind of early year settings and things. So this could be a bit of a knock-on effect, that it seems like children have lost skills when actually it might be a little bit more of parenting and parenting skills that took a hit, which then impacted the children. So it's definitely worth thinking about that information that I was telling you about earlier, getting it out early, making sure parents feel prepared and empowered on their child's potty training journey and how to get there. In other countries, though, the expectations and methods are different. So, for example, in China, the typical age is younger, and you're more often to see something that the first time I saw it felt a bit strange to me because it was different, but it's not necessarily an odd or wrong thing to do. So in China, you quite often see split trousers. In some cultures, it's completely normal. You have split trousers and no underwear underneath, so the child can just immediately go where they are. They just squat down and they can pee or they can poo without worrying about their clothes needing adjusting. They don't need to pull anything up and down. It's not going to get dirty because it's just like a big hole in the trousers. and it's super normal. And that means that the typical age is younger because they don't need to have all these other skills that we expect in Western society. And kind of when it happens, it's just happening out kind of outside and things. So it was very interesting, and it was a bit of a shock to the system when I saw it. But actually, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a difference. And in many cultures, there is a technique called elimination communication, and it is something that's become a little bit more popular here as well. And they use it from infancy, so from very tiny baby, that the main caregivers recognize body signals or facial expressions, kind of sounds, tensing, all of these kind of things. And they'll hold the baby over a predetermined place, such as a bowl or a certain place on the ground. And they often make a kind of shh sound while the baby is weeing or pooing. And then that is the aim, that the baby learns to hold it back until they hear the noise. So as the baby links that sound to the bowel movement or to passing urine, that they then hold it in until they hear the sound. It's a bit like some kind of conditioning, I suppose. So that when a parent then holds the baby over the bowl and makes that sound, the baby will then do a wee or a poo. And it can be for a variety of reasons that this kind of method has developed. It can be tradition, it can be just, seen as, well, this is what we do, similar to here, or, well, we expect this and they expect that. And so it is hypothesized that there are logistic reasons for some cultures who need to be able to work on farmlands while wearing a baby and not having access to disposable nappies. So it can be kind of the attitude of towards pooing as well, and towards soiling yourself, that is kind of, some cultures might find this disgusting and repulsive, and that you don't, if you're wearing your baby on your back while you're working in the farm, you don't want the baby to poo on the caregiver, because then that would be seen with disgust, not just an accident. So being able to kind of make the baby go on demand means that the caregiver can work and not get covered in baby poo. So that's one hypothesis as to why that's a popular kind of form in many cultures. And it definitely is something I've seen here as well. I've had parents ask me to use that kind of method with their child. So it's definitely something to think about, that you might be kind of asked to do that, and how you might manage that, what your designated area might be, whether you think that's something you could offer in your setting. That'll be up to you and discussions you have with your family. So you can see, if you work in an area where you're likely to have a diverse community, then it's important to know and discuss with family their potty training expectations. And you don't need to do it in a presumptuous way that if you have a family who have a Chinese background, that you go, oh, well, because they're Chinese, they're going to want to send their child to split trousers and do. You don't have to have discussions like this. You just have a discussion with every family about, how would you like to approach potty training? This is my policy on potty training. How do you feel about this? Are there any methods you're particularly inclined towards? Have a conversation with every family, not just ones from different backgrounds, because that wouldn't be very inclusive. Every family, you can have this discussion. And if they're not sure, then you have ways that you can signpost them, because you have all that information you collected. And you might have tried and tested methods that work for you in your setting, and that you can help give them tips about, because ultimately we're the professionals and we're the ones who are seen as the people with all the advice to go to. And we might not have all the answers, and it might be tricky, and there might be things that we don't understand, why a child keeps on, is completely fine weeing in a potty, but it seems really anxious and nervous about pooing in a potty. And that's when we go, do you know what, maybe we need to seek medical advice for your child, and kind of take that with health visitor and GP. So we're not the kind of complete guru over potty training. It's not what we're aiming to be. We're aiming to be confident. We're aiming to have the knowledge, but also where to send parents if things aren't quite going to plan. So don't panic if you're not sure about something. There is always going to be someone or some information somewhere where we can find that help. I've talked quite a bit about your expectations and your policies around potty training. So, should you have a potty training policy and procedure? Well, it depends, my friend, on how you want your setting to operate. You need to think about some things, and then kind of look at your frameworks. But think about things like, do you expect parents to take time off in order to teach their child when they are ready? I didn't know this was a thing until I researched this episode. I went to kind of some forums to find kind of questions that people ask, and I was relatively surprised to see quite a lot of childminders make it an expectation that parents will take their holiday time off of work to teach their child. They will take the whole week off and start kind of a Friday night and go all the way through that weekend, the week and that weekend before the child comes back. And if they're not getting it, then they're not to be potty training when they come back. I found that quite a surprise, but if that's your policy, then if that's your expectation and your view on the parent's role and your role, then each to their own. Do you want to protect your furniture? Soft play groups by enforcing that during the early stages they wear a pull-up, because let's face it, the worst thing that might happen is a child has a wee or a poo accident in a ball pit. It's happened, and we don't need to feel ashamed about it, but is it something that you don't want to have to face? So until they're more reliable, they need to be wearing a pull-up. If you have any expectations like this, then it might be worthwhile writing up a policy and ensuring that parents have signed and agreed to it so that everyone knows the deal. It isn't a surprise. Then in future, if you have any disagreements about toilet training, then you can refer back to your signed policy. But especially in England, not all policies legally have to be written. It's always worth checking on your kind of country's framework, but here we don't need to have a potty training policy. You have some that are a requirement, like safeguarding, but it is not a legal requirement, so it is up to you. I personally have lots of policies that are not the legal requirements because it's much easier for everyone if they're written down. If everyone knows you're singing off the same sheet, that you're if there are any questions, you can refer back to it. If you aren't sure of something, you've got your procedure there. So it's definitely worth thinking about. And if you do have expectations that you have that will be something that might be up for discussion with a parent, then you need to be having a policy in place. If you're someone who's really easygoing and doesn't care what method you take, and you don't care how long it takes, and then you're more likely to be able to go with the flow. So it is completely up to you. But in saying that, you should definitely check your country's statutory requirements to make sure that that isn't something that you need. I tried to look it up. I couldn't see anything, but I'm not all knowing about all the different countries' frameworks. So make sure you look it up for yourself. Well, haven't we spoken about a lot today? Goodness, I hope you were doing something non-revolving around food while we discussed all of that. So, things to think about. Think about a policy and your own expectations well before you start having any conversations about potty training. Work in partnership with parents before potty training begins. Know the anatomically correct names for body parts. Learn what a healthy bowel movement is for a young child, and so you know when something isn't quite right. Because a parent who's a first-time parent who's never really looked at anyone else's poo before, because let's be honest, people barely look at their own, and it's something we should do more often, because poo tells us all sorts of information about our body. It tells us if we're stressed, it tells us if our hormones are out of whack. The bowel movements can tell us if we're intolerant to something. It can be an indicator of something. If there's blood in your stool, you should immediately go and see a doctor. So if a parent hasn't ever looked at their own poo, and then they look at their child, they're looking at their child's poo, but they don't really know if that's normal because they've never looked at anyone else's poo before and haven't looked at these charts and images and stuff, so You need to remember that homework and go undercut that bowel movement chart, the stool chart, and make sure you know what looks normal. You need to think about the challenges. That's something we thought about, that we might face challenges and how we're going to plan for those to get around them. We thought about how potty training is different around the world and that different isn't wrong, but it's something that we need to consider when we're working with families in diverse communities so that we know what to expect and how to handle things. And whether or not you think potty training is your responsibility, we can help with the parenting skills that are part of our role so that parents feel empowered to support their child. And it's an important part of child development. Everyone goes through it. And we want children ultimately to be ready to experience school without fear, without shame, without being overwhelmed. So it's really something that we should think about working with parents with, so that everybody feels comfortable and that we have a society where there's no longer any shame about talking about our bodies, about what, everybody has bowel movements, everybody has, funny smelling wee sometimes, especially if you eat asparagus. All of these things, we shouldn't have to be ashamed, especially talking to your doctor. And I'm going to talk to you now about your poo and wee and not about the children's. You need to not be ashamed about your body and about what it does. And if you think that something isn't quite right with your body, please, please, please go and see a doctor. It is not something to be messing about with. If you have found blood in your poo, go to the doctor. Talk to them about it. Don't be ashamed. Be factual. Know the words and do it, because it is not a laughing matter. If you've got blood in your stool, it can be a sign of something more serious. It's not a joking around. It's not something to be ashamed about. Go and do it. It might save your life. It's a serious thing. And we want to be able to teach the children as well skills and confidence in their bodies so that it might save their life in the future too. So let's not mess around and be ashamed about it anymore. Everybody poops, everybody wheezes, everybody has bowel movements, everybody farts, everybody smells sometimes. We just need to get over it and talk about it properly, because the last thing I would want is for someone to feel ashamed and be unwell and scared on their own and not be able to talk to doctors and miss something that could have been curable. And that, my friends, is what I'm going to leave you with. I hope that you feel more empowered to talk about these things. I hope that you feel empowered to listen to your own body and be able to seek help if you need it. And I hope that you feel able to talk to parents about potty training, and also to help children be ready for school and not have this something that's all over the news all of the time for a loss of skills, when really it's us and the adults that need to help the children. It's not really about the children. Human development hasn't changed in the last 4 years, really. So it's something in society that has changed. Children have not lost skills. It's society that have lost knowledge and have lost the ability to talk about these things. So let's break it. Let's go and do it. And let's get on with the rest of the day. That's enough talking about poo, and I will see you soon. Bye. Mind that Childminder. Find us on Facebook, X, and Instagram for more about upcoming episodes. All topics discussed are intended for entertainment and educational purposes. This podcast is not intended to give any legal advice and is purely an opinion and supportive piece.